Hey guys, what's up? So today I want to be showing you my fully custom, partly 3D printed, partly kit bashed Angmar army that I've gotten a lot of questions about. It has won a few painting competitions, so we thought we might want to show it off on the channel and tell you a bit on how I painted my models, how I figured out the paint scheme, and what the general idea of it was when I started out with this army. I think I should start with the model that it all began with, which is the new Witch King of Angmar model. I have it right here. When this model came out, I thought that I wanted to do something special with the model and not just paint it straight up, but give it a more of a cool kind of vibe and do something different with it that set it out from other Witch Kings that you saw on the field normally. So I got to thinking and I was like, what kind of moment or what kind of vibe do I want to capture that really represents Angmar? And one of the things that I came down to was that I really liked the vibe and style of Minas Morgul in the films. Like that eerie, creepy, dark lighting from the bottom of the field, that, yeah, sort of a bit faint white bluish tint that the whole castle got. And yeah, I thought that was really cool. It was really menacing and really creepy. So I was thinking like, okay, so what if my Witch King model was standing on the buttresses or the walls of Minas Morgul, looking out over the whole army of Angmar? So it's a bit of a lore twist because, of course, Minas Morgul is not in Angmar actually, but that was the vibe I was going for. So what I started out with was just a basic regular paint job, and after that I thought I'd try my hand at some OSL lighting effects. I saw a lot of tutorials on YouTube that had instructions on OSL and lighting, but I always thought it was kind of menacing, it looked very difficult, and I wasn't exactly sure on whether I could achieve that type of feel and look. So I was looking for somewhat of a shortcut to achieve the effect with not as much effort, so I could duplicate it on all the models that I wanted to make. Later on I'll show you a step-by-step on how I actually achieved that effect, but for now it's safe to say that I used an airbrush, and that with a few simple steps it turned out that I could really achieve the effect that I wanted to and that I was looking for, and yeah, got a really cool kind of below lit effect that really made the model pop out. After I got done with the Witch King, I had that model for a couple of months, and I was looking to get into a new army after my elves for the next season of competitive play, and I was like, yeah, I think I'm just gonna give Angmar a try. Until that point on, I already had painted some orcs, I had the old Gullivar model, I had the Shane model, so I was already testing Angmar out on a few games, and I was really liking the way that it played and how it felt on the battlefield. This is not going to be a tactics video because, of course, at the point of recording, we're still waiting for the new edition of the game and are very not sure on how all the armies are going to be played from that point on. So I'll mostly be talking about looks and visuals, but that was my consideration when switching over to Angmar. So I got to thinking and I got to theorizing on how I wanted my Angmar army to look before I started out with painting all the models. And one of the things that I really wanted to achieve was a look of Angmar at the top or peak of its power. So when Angmar was really conquering different kingdoms, when the Witch King was at the peak of his power, it was all like a beginning of Third Age Angmar type of feel that I was going for. So I wanted my orcs to be a bit more strong looking, a bit more heavily armored, and I wanted them to look a bit more menacing than the 20-year-old plastic sculpts that we've had until then. So I started looking online, and a friend that usually does some 3D printing for me showed me a Kickstarter for a type of orc sculpt. I think it was called Battle of the Shattered Plains or Shattered Fields, that had some heavily armored orcs that I was really getting into. I was really loving the vibe of those orcs. So once I've settled on a model, I thought, like, okay, this is going to be the base of my army. I already have the Witch King, and until that point on, I was also usually running the Shade in combination with Gulliver. Now that's a bit of an unusual combination of heroes, because you usually see one or the other, but up until then I was really liking how the Shade in combination with Gulliver and Witch King worked. So I decided to take those three models as the base for my hero models. At that point on, I selected my orc sculpts. I gave an assignment to print all the orcs that I needed. As you can see on the table, I have a rather big selection of orcs, but it basically is all orcs are with shield. I don't run any orcs without a shield unless they have a bow or a two-handed weapon. And they all have either a pickaxe or an axe, because I wanted to use the piercing strike. So I gave them all axes. I think that around 2/3 of the orcs received spears. I have 4 orc models that have a orc bow, and I have 4 orc models that have a two-handed axe. This was the base for my army. I think I have around 40-ish models with different types of weapons for that, so I got that covered. Then from the same Kickstarter, I also managed to find some cool warg riders that I painted up later on, because I wanted to try a different composition of army. So I decided to paint up 4 warg riders, and along with them a orc captain on warg, which you also see here on the table in front of me. And the orc captain model was actually a proxy model 3D print or file that would represent Azog, but I scaled him a bit down and had him printed at around the 90 or 80% scale, and put him on a warg, and I thought that this was a cool and menacing strong orc captain. So I put that one in my army as well. I also found a cool Shade model that I managed to get printed, and for my wargs, my dismounts, I couldn't actually find any good models that I really liked and looked really menacing. And of course the 20-year-old warg models that Games Workshop had weren't really appealing to me at all. But then I found out that Warhammer 40k actually also had a few wolf models, namely the Fenrisian wolves. So I actually bought a pack of Fenrisian wolves and painted them up to look more like wargs to fit into the rest in my army, because the Fenrisian wolves don't have any high-tech gizmos or anything else on their sculpts. They're just basically plain wolves. So you can actually just use them in Lord of the Rings as well. After I have selected all those models, I just needed a few extras, namely the Deadmarsh Spectres, a banner model that I got covered in the same Kickstarter, and a few ring wraiths that I managed to print out afterwards. When I did that, I had pretty much all my bases covered, except one, which was Gulliver. And I already had a Gulliver model, which still is pretty rare, but I thought I needed a Gulliver model that looked a bit more modern and a bit more different. So I went out to look for a cool replacement or proxy model. What I settled down on was actually also a Games Workshop model, but that one was called the Vargskier. And it's a model that came from, I thought it was called, it was a box set, a boxed game set from Games Workshop. I think it was called From Lost City. I don't remember the actual name, something like Lost City or City, something with city. So I bought the whole box just for that one model, because I thought I could use the other models for other projects. I managed to assemble the Vargskier model. I have it right here. But then he still needed wings. So for my wings, I went with another type of model, which was the Balrog. I already had a Balrog that I bought second-hand. I wasn't doing anything with it. I was not running a Moria army, so I was like, to hell with it. I just sawed off the wings of the Balrog. He literally got clipped. And I managed to sculpt on the wings of the Balrog on the Vargskir model. And I thought that looks really awesome and menacing. So I was really happy with the way it was starting to look. I managed to green stuff the edges of the wings so that it really looked like part of the model. I pinned them in place so they were really secure. Yeah, I was really satisfied with the result. So you'll most likely see some cool shots of him as well. So I was at the point that I selected all my models, but that still left me with a choice for basing. And I always think that a good basing scheme or a cool, unique base can really make a model pop and really make it stand out from the crowd or what you usually see with a bit of sand, a few grass tufts, and that's it. So I was thinking, once again, along the lines of Angmar, Minas Morgul, what do I want to use as basis for that type of feel? And soon I found also a 3D sculpt of a very gritty, sort of dilapidated sort of stonework that I thought was really fitting for my models. So I actually had the same guy that printed all the models for me print out a whole bunch of different models, or bases I should say, whole different types of sizes, and I thought like, yeah, this was a good fit for my army. Afterwards, because I didn't paint the whole army all at once, I added some models, so for instance the Warg Riders and the 2 Ring Wraiths, and I actually used generation shift resin bases for those. So I also had a bit of variation in my basing options as well. So I used generation shift bases for a few of the models that I painted later after I painted the bulk of the army. So I had my models chosen. I had my basing options chosen, and now it was time to start painting. I already, of course, had the experience of painting my Witch King model, so I knew what I was getting myself into with regards of the OSL effect, and I knew that I wanted to use on all the models. But I still had to choose like a painting scheme for mostly the orcs, because that was going to be the bulk of my army. I made a test model. That's something I always recommend, making a test model, and got to painting and was really satisfied with the way that came out. So I'm going to be talking you through the painting process that I used for mostly my orc models, because they make up the bulk of the army, and also make up for a lot of different pieces that the heroes have, but I won't be showing each separate painting process for every separate hero, because then the video would be far too long. The painting process for my orcs. I started out with a zenithal highlight, first of course a black prime with a rattle can. Then a zenithal highlight with basic white from the top still, because that informed me on how my usual painting choices needed to be with highlights and stuff like that. Because I did choose to do a regular type of highlighting and not chose to highlight all the models from facing downwards where the OSL was going to be. Because the idea is that the OSL was caused by sort of a backlit effect from Minas Morgul, and not so much the main light source. The main light source was still like the sun or either the moon, so highlights on top still made sense to me. After the zenithal prime, I had a few steps that I took to make the armor, and most of the orcs have quite heavy armor on them, so they make up most of the model. So that was one of the most important choices that I had to make. It wasn't actually that hard to paint the armor, and you can easily replicate it yourself. I started off with a base of Leadbelcher. It's a GW paint. It's more like a sort of darker type of silver paint. I think a gunmetal paint would also be fine. And I painted all the armor up, just a base coat. Then I used a black wash to wash all the armor. And after that, I used a step of applying Dirty Down Rust. I really like this product. It works really well. I think one of the most important steps with applying a rust effect, and especially with Dirty Down Rust, is that it's important that you shake the cup very heavily to really mix all the chemicals that are within this little bottle. Usually when it stands still for too long, for more like a week, then it's also really important that you take a stirring stick or a mixing stick, open the bottle, and also mix all the goo that gets settled down in the bottom of the bottle. Mix it all together until it becomes liquid again, because then you'll have the best rust effect for your armor. So shake it really well. Then take a old painting brush that got its bristles all mixed up. They're all standing apart. That's really important. Dip it in a little bit, maybe in the cap of the bottle. Pour a little bit in so you don't overuse it. Dip a bit in the brush. Tip off most of the excess on a paper towel, and then start stippling randomly on the armor of your orcs. You can do this a bit sloppily if you haven't painted the rest of your orcs. That's totally fine. Just dip it so it gets sort of a natural look of rust on the armor of all your orcs. Once you've done that, the only thing that's left actually is a highlight of a silver color. I used quite a bright silver color because I really like the armor standing out and being able to see the highlight from a bit of a distance. But if you're looking for more of a subtle effect, I'd recommend just going back to the Leadbelcher and using a little bit of a lighter silver to mix that in, and then adding the highlights to your models. Then I still needed to have the icons on the shields. One of the things that I thought was important to represent was the iconography of Angmar. Because I didn't want to be painting just plain shields, because that was boring, and this was going to be my prize army. So yeah, I wanted to have some cool icons. So I looked up some old icons on the internet of ancient Angmar or the Mordor Black Speech, and found a few different icons that I thought looked cool but were also attainable through painting, because I'm not a freehand wizard. Freehand painting is always a pain, so I thought, okay, I don't need to make this too hard for myself. One of the icons that I was really proud of was the icon that I also have on my banner, and it sort of looks like a number 7, and I don't know why, but I really liked the feel and look of this icon, and I thought it was easy to paint, but I also liked the way it looked. So what I did to make the icons look a bit more rusted off on the shields, or a bit more tattered, is that I first used a color, a brighter color, but not white. It's a bit of an off-white. I used Pallid Witch Flesh from GW. And I painted on the icon first in a smaller scale, or how shall I put this, just the line work. And after that, if I was satisfied with the shape of it, I filled out the rest with the white paint. Then, after it had dried, I of course needed to make it look rusty again, because a bright icon didn't really match the rusted shields that I put them on. So what I did, I tore off a bit of a sponge. I got a brown color, something like dryad bark or rhinox hide. I dipped it in the paint. I dipped off most of the excess of the sponge on a paper towel, and then I started gently sponging or stippling over my white icon so I could achieve sort of like the same rust effect. That went very well. I was really happy with the result, so I did that with all my shields, used a few different effects. Some shields have the crown of the Witch King, the Morgul crown. Some shields have other iconography you'll probably see in the video. So you got all your metals covered. Then I painted up the rest. For all the clothes, I used either a blue color, which was, let me see here, Stegadon Scale Green. It says green on the bottle for Citadel color, but I actually think it's more of a blue color. So I used that for a lot of the clothes. I used around a third of the orcs got that color, then a third of the orcs got Lupercal green, and then a third of the orcs got Mephiston red. I used different colors because I wanted a bit of variation for my army, not wanting to have them all wear the same type of clothes. So that's why I used 3 different colors. That's basically a painting process of making a base coat, washing it with either an Agrex or Nuln oil, then doing a first highlight layer with the same color, and then doing a fine highlight with one color lighter than that. Usually I just mixed in a white and made a lighter color that way. That was basically the process for all the clothes. It's really simple, really easy, and it looks good because the OSL effect distracts from a lot of the flaws that you might make with the painting process. So it's really easy to make it look cool once the OSL is on, and you can forgive yourself for some mistakes that you make along the way. All the different leather colors, I just used a Mournfang brown, I believe. Just really basic, just a Mournfang brown and a wash, not even a highlight, because they're so tiny that you usually don't even see those highlights until you're like 10 centimeters away from the model. But because I needed to paint like 45 orcs, I didn't even bother. The wood was painted up with Dryad bark. Also washed over it and then highlighted it with a bit of a lighter color. I don't remember exactly what color, but just use a lighter brown, that's fine. For the orc skin, a lot of the orc skin is covered actually, so I didn't have a lot of painting for that, or there wasn't a lot of painting necessary. But for the paints that I did use, I used somewhat of a Nurgling green for green skin. I used, once again, Stegadon Scale Green, I believe, for some blue skin. And I used I think it was the Fang for a light blue skin. What I noticed that you can achieve a lot of the effects that you want to achieve, not with the base coat or the color that you use, but more with the washing and the griming techniques that you use. So I used different types of colors of washes from Games Workshop, or I used streaking grime, for example, to achieve really that dirty orc skin feel. You can use different types of products at your own discretion, but I mainly use streaking grime or just heavy washes, maybe a green and a blue wash, 2 layers, to really make the orc skin look dirty. Then I only had some of the skins and furs to paint and the leathers, but that's once again just really a basic process of a base coat that you like, a wash over it that is fitting, so an Agrex wash for the more lighter colors and a Nuln oil wash for the more darker colors, and then a highlight. It's nothing special, nothing fancy, but it really got the job done. Then we got to the OSL effect. Well, actually, one step back, I also painted the bases of the models separately, because I knew that I wanted to give the bases also sort of a cool non-generic vibe. I placed all my orcs during the painting process on a base that they wouldn't end up on. It was just a replacement base that I used a bit of double-sided tape on it, stuck them on, started painting, so I could really put some more details in the bases that I used. So the painting process for my bases was actually quite easy, but the effect was really remarkable. What I did was I first primed all my bases black. Then I decided that I needed to dry brush on the highlights, because the dry brushing and the highlight needed to act like a filter for the airbrushing stage that was going to come after that. I once again wanted to achieve sort of a non-generic vibe, so I chose a blue color actually for my stonework, and not gray or brown, what you usually see. So I used a black highlight, then I got an off-white color. Once again, it was Pallid Witch Flesh. I dry brushed all the bases, and because there are a lot of stones on the bases, there were enough spots for the brush to really catch the edges of the stones and really give it a nice subtle highlight effect. Once I've done that, I had black bases with a white highlight. And then I decided to airbrush a single color over all of the bases. The color that I used is a color right here, it's Night Lord's Blue, which I heavily diluted so I could use it in the airbrush. And I added 1 or 2 drops of black ink to make it even a bit more darker. Because once you shoot a paint out of an airbrush, it usually comes across a bit lighter because the pigments get more scattered and because it's diluted. So I made the color a bit more darker by adding 2 drops of ink. So I airbrushed all the bases, and that pretty much already was the basic scheme for my basing. The only things that I did differently was that I glued on some skulls on the bases to give a little bit more of effect, and some thorn bushes or thorny vines. Both of those I got from the Dol Guldur scenery kits that I didn't use for the scenery themselves. So I used them for the basing of my orcs, but you can easily buy a GW Citadel Skulls pack and achieve the same result. And then basically my bases were done for the time being. So I drilled and pinned all the models on the bases, and then the army was finally ready for the OSL effects. And I think that's probably something that you are here to get explained. So we'll dive right into it. This OSL effect is actually very beginner friendly and very easy to achieve. First, you want to make some sort of a filter once again. So I used a white ink, because an ink has a very high pigment count, higher than the basic acrylics that we use for model painting. I used the white ink, shot it through the airbrush, and decided on a point on the model where I thought it would be interesting that the lighting would come from. So it would achieve an interesting effect that I had enough places to highlight the models later on, and thought like, okay, this would look cool and menacing. So I used the white ink in the airbrush and used sort of a thought like, okay, the light from Minas Morgul is coming from a certain direction, so it would light up probably like this area of the model if it was facing the light in this way. And used that to inform my airbrushing decisions. You can see it on this model right here on the Ringwraith as well. Here the light came sort of from down below to the side, and that is how I highlighted up the model. So it's very scary at the start because you already painted your model and then suddenly you get a white layer over it. It's very scary, but don't worry about it because you're gonna achieve a very cool result in the end. Once I put the white highlight or white layer on with the airbrush, then it was time to achieve the colored look. Once your white ink layer is on there, then you can start coloring the OSL effect. So what I did was I chose the color Lilac Oxide. I chose Lilac Oxide because I thought that was coming closest to the Minas Morgul sort of lighting. I had some reference pictures on my computer, but of course if you want to make more of a flame effect or other type of color or light, you can use a color accordingly. With Lilac Oxide, it's already a very liquid color, it's more of a contrast paint. So I put that in the airbrush and then I shot over the areas that I painted with the white ink, and that gave it a very subtle hue of, that sort of like that light blue green color that you see on the models right here. One tip that I have is that you want to overspray a little bit with your color, overspray the white parts. So if the white edging ended on a certain part of the model, I tended to spray the color that was going on top of it a little bit over that. So you had a sort of subtle color gradient effect where the light was more dim. So the effect would be less pronounced at the edges, which would make it seem more realistic. And after that, you basically only have one step left, which is a highlight with a pure white color. I really use the pure white right here. This is a D&D type of paint that I had laying around, but you can use any pure white color. Make sure to dilute it, of course, because white is a very tricky paint to get on smoothly. But I used the white color, and what I did was, once again, I thought very hard on where the light source was of the effect, and on all the edges that the light catches, or that the light would be most intense, that's where I highlighted it with pure white. So you really got an effect or an idea of a strong light coming from below and really lighting up your whole model. That's something you need to figure out yourself with a bit of trial and error, but it's really not that hard. Get basing or get models that have a lot of sharp and raised edges, so you can really give that vibrant feel of the lighting. So it's one basic highlight layer of white for most of your models, and after that you're basically done. So yeah, that's my Angmar army. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm really proud of it myself. It really is my best painting effort thus far. I really like playing the models as well. The last one I painted for this army was the Shadow of Rudauer, which you see over here. Basically had the same painting scheme with a few exceptions, but if you use this painting scheme, you can basically get this done for 99% of all the models. So, hope you enjoyed. See you in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe to Lowlands Wargaming, and see you around. See ya!